I'm going to read the second half of the second chapter, the Davidson chapter. Davidson lived across from us when I was a teenager. His wife, Donna, was a beautician in a salon uptown. She had been to cosmetology school, making her the most educated person on our street. Her alma mater had a commercial on TV with a jingle everyone could sing if pressed to, though few would think of it without prompting. It was one of those things you didn't know you knew until somebody brought it up. The Buckeye School of Cosmetology, the leader, the largest in Ohio. It wasn't much if you thought about it, but it did stick in your mind. As she had to have a license to do what she did, that brought with it an air of authority and class. A bit of that feeling of having something pulled together spilled over to her husband, though he had done nothing to earn it except to marry her. My mom's con man of a dirtbag brother, Uncle Buster, met Davidson someplace. I assumed through mutual friends, as Buster hung out in bars and Davidson wasn't into that, at this point in his life at least. Buster was a hustler, but he had no particular focus for his work. It would have eras, periods where he'd specialize, like in selling sides of beef or offering partnerships in some odd-ass get-rich-quick scam. If nothing else was happening, he'd steal a few checks from the back of a friend's checkbook and write them out to cash and get a little action going that way. Once he stole my mother's paycheck from the mailbox. He was into the criminal thrill of it more than for the money he'd make. When I was a teenager working as a janitor making $15 every 2 weeks, he tried to get me to invest in my future by paying him $99 for a briefcase full of motivational tapes recorded by Glenn Turner, a guy with a hair lip. He had stolen them from his brother's unlocked car. Out of curiosity, as he was pitching them, I took one of the tapes from the briefcase and listened to some of it. Apparently, Turner believed that overcoming the social stigma associated with having a hair lip helped make him great. It didn't help his speech, though. After a few minutes of hearing his voice and imitating it, I was laughing really hard. It pissed Buster off. I kept saying in that affected or afflicted voice, "You too can be great." But it sounded more like, "You too can be great." Buster said I'd never be great, and he took the tape back. Buster told Davidson about Andy, as he always had to be hustling something, selling something for profit, even if it was only to raise his value in the eyes of Davidson as someone who knew a guy who was into the same things as him. It was an investment with a possible payoff later in the mind of Buster. It was also a way to stay at the front of the conversation, to control how it went. Any line of shit that kept him there would have worked. He told Davidson Andy had done a lot of drugs and said he's cool. That was all a person in that situation really needed to know, to have it confirmed by someone they trusted. It let him know that Andy would be good to hang out with, as he could keep quiet about the drug use and not draw a lot of attention. It wasn't as if there were an ongoing police investigation, as if a bust was going to happen. Half the fun of the thing, being a drug user, was imagining that something could happen. Sitting on your ass all day stoned was turned into more of an adventure where you challenged things if you believed that you were a wanted criminal, rather than seeing yourself as what you really were. Just a guy in a shitty little house on a street like 1,000 other shitty streets and 1,000 other shitty little towns who wasn't amounting to much. Making a character for yourself who maybe had to worry about those kinds of things was a critical part of addiction. It set the parameters that allowed a person to be stoned or drunk, as it gave him a sense of purpose, a job of sorts. I saw older stoners Davidson hung out with at his house. They had personas they had created to use to fit in, an edge they played. It gave them a spot, a place to stand, something to be in that group. There was this one guy who let it be thought that he was a really great guitarist. He had a Stratocaster he treated like a holy object, not letting anyone touch it. I saw him get it out a few times. He'd play a few chords and tune it, but he never played a song. Years later, I asked one of the guys from that time if he really could play the guitar. Was he really any good? I was told average at best. He knew some basic chords. But because none of the guys he hung out with knew anything about guitar, and he wanted to know someone who could play like a real rock star, he filled a need and could claim the status of that position. He assumed the cool that came with a guitar, a rocker via proxy. He'd mention Clapton or Jimmy Page and go into explanations of why they were great, and everyone bought it as if he really knew, as if he got it, and maybe he could play like that himself. Some guys tried to invent those drug characters to become like the ones they saw others admiring, but you really couldn't invent one and hard sell it. You had to develop for the situation and let the others campaign for you, or it didn't work. It looked as if you were trying too hard. These weren't complicated setups generally. One of the guys might get a new pair of motorcycle boots and work that angle for a week or two, be the guy who knows about motorcycles, the guy who's as tough as a biker. My cousin Eddie, who was a drunk, once got a cheap suit and wore it every day for more than 2 weeks and been in a different life until the newness wore off of the suit and he gave it up. He didn't give it up in resignation that it would not work, but more as if he had filed the experience away as an adventure, an aspect of himself he could use later before the charm of having it faded and began to look like a dumbass. He could recall the suit and say things such as, "I used to be into the hustle and bustle of the business world, but I figured it wasn't worth it. I'd much rather take time to be with my friends and enjoy life." When all he really did was wear it until he had worked that angle to death of having accomplished something in all the crappy bars in the area and in front of his friends and relatives amazed to see him looking so good. Davidson's character was laid back, cool. He was not about being employed. In fact, he agreed to marry Donna when she was pregnant with his kid. She said if he did, he'd never have to work again. It sounded like a pretty good deal to him. And that's the end of that. There's actually the rest of the chapter, but I think we're going a little long here.